In the frozen winter of Montana, little Lily stood trembling as her teacher ripped her essay to pieces in front of the entire class. No one believed her. Her classmates pulled away, and her teacher scolded her, calling her a liar, saying, "Kids like you don't have heroes for fathers." But just minutes later, the roar of black SUVs cutting through the blizzard echoed across the schoolyard. And when the classroom door swung open, the truth stepped inside with a man in full military uniform and a powerful German shepherd at his side. What happened next stunned the entire town. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. The winter morning over Maple Ridge pressed down with a soft gray sky. Snow drifting in slow, unending waves against the windows of Maple Ridge Elementary. Inside room 12, the faint smell of wet boots and old textbooks mingled with chalk dust. It was the kind of cold that made breath hang between words. Yet none of that bothered 10-year-old Lily Brooks, who sat quietly at her wooden desk, fingers wrapped around a pencil that had been sharpened down to a stub. Lily was small for her age, with long dark brown hair often braided by her mother before school, round hazel eyes that showed both caution and curiosity, and a gentle way of moving, as if she was always trying not to disturb anyone around her. Her winter coat, thin, faded at the seams, too short since last year, hung on the back of her chair, dusted with lingering snowflakes. Though she rarely spoke unless asked to, there was a quiet strength in the way she sat, a stillness earned by a childhood full of uncertainty every time her father deployed. She pressed her lips together in concentration and wrote the opening line of her assignment. "My father is Lieutenant Colonel William Brooks of the United States Army." At another table, Mrs. Janet Rollins, her teacher, paced slowly between rows of desks. Mrs. Rollins was in her mid-50s, a tall and angular woman whose sharp cheekbones and thin mouth gave her an air of permanent disapproval. Her hair, pale blonde streaked with silver, was pinned tightly into a bun, and her blue eyes seemed always to be searching for imperfections. For years, she had been known around Maple Ridge Elementary as a teacher with strict rules, traditional expectations, and a belief that children should know their place. She rarely smiled, except with students who came from families she considered promising. With others, especially those who struggled financially or came from military families who transferred often, her tone was clipped and suspicious. Lily often felt those eyes linger on her a second too long, as though Mrs. Rollins was waiting for her to make a mistake. Still, Lily wrote on, ignoring the nervous flutter in her stomach. She had been waiting days for this assignment. She loved writing about her father, not the classified parts she wasn't allowed to mention, but the way he laughed when she tried to braid his short dark hair, the way his stubble felt when he kissed her forehead goodbye before every deployment, and the way his deep voice softened when he talked to Max, the family's German shepherd. Max wasn't just any dog. He was 4 years old, large and muscular, with a thick coat of black and tan fur and intelligent amber eyes that always seemed to understand more than a normal dog should. Trained as a military working dog, Max had a calm but alert presence, his movements smooth and calculated. Lily adored him. When her father had returned 2 weeks earlier, his face more weather-worn, new scars running along one knuckle, his brown eyes quieter than before, Max had run to her first, knocking her backward into the snow with an excited bark. She had laughed and hugged him so tightly she felt her heartbeat match his. Thinking of that moment steadied her now as she finished her paragraph. He just returned home after a long mission. He protects people. He protects our country, and Max protects him. When she placed her pencil down, she felt a small swell of pride, something rare for her. But that feeling shattered when the sound of heels stopped beside her desk. Mrs. Rollins cleared her throat. "Lily," she said in a voice cold as the wind outside, "let me see your work." Lily handed her the paper with careful fingers, her heart thudding. She watched as the teacher's eyes scanned the lines, her expression tightening with every second. Mrs. Rollins's nostrils flared slightly as she paused at the sentence about Lily's father. She looked up, her gaze sweeping Lily's worn coat, the frayed cuffs of her sleeves, her old boots with cracked rubber near the toes. "Lieutenant Colonel?" Mrs. Rollins repeated, raising a thin eyebrow. "Is that what you've decided to claim today?" The room fell silent. Lily's throat closed. "It's not a claim," she whispered. It's true. A flash of irritation cut across the teacher's face. Lily, I know your living situation. I know what kind of home you come from. She lowered the paper slightly, her gaze icy. Families like yours do not have high-ranking officers as parents. Lily felt her cheeks burn hot despite the cold. A few students glanced back at her, some confused, others already sliding their chairs away as if her shame might be contagious. Mrs. Rollins held the essay up between two fingers as though it were contaminated. This, she declared loudly, is a fabrication. And before Lily could speak, before she could explain that her father kept a low profile because of his job, that their small, rented cabin outside town was temporary, that military families moved so often they rarely built luxurious lives, before she could do any of that, Mrs. Rollins tore the paper in half, then in half again, and again. The ripping echoed through the classroom like snapping branches in the forest. Lily stared at the pieces falling like snowflakes at her feet. Her breath caught in her chest. Something inside her collapsed. A tremor ran through her fingers as she struggled to understand why her truth had been destroyed so violently. She tried to swallow, but her throat felt locked, as if grief itself was choking her. "Stand up," Mrs. Rollins ordered. Lily rose slowly, knees trembling. "You will not lie in my classroom," the teacher continued, her voice growing harder. This assignment was meant to reflect honesty and respect, not fantasies about military heroes and trained attack dogs. Lily blinked rapidly, tears stinging at the corners of her eyes. Not because she was weak, but because she had spent her whole life learning to be brave in silence. She stood perfectly still, her small hands gripping the hem of her sweater until her knuckles turned white. She thought of her father's smile when he surprised her 2 weeks ago, the tired but proud look in his eyes, the faint scent of snow and engine oil clinging to his uniform. She thought of Max's warm fur pressed against her cheek, and for a moment she wanted to shout the truth, to defend herself. But fear held her voice prisoner. "Sit down," Mrs. Rollins snapped. Lily obeyed, staring at the scraps of paper scattered like a broken promise on the floor. Outside the window, snow continued to fall, quiet, relentless, and indifferent to the injustice unfolding within the walls of room 12. Lily lowered her head. She didn't know it yet, but this moment, this humiliation, would be the spark that changed everything in Maple Ridge. Snow still drifted steadily against the brick walls of Maple Ridge Elementary as Lily Brooks followed the long hallway toward the administrative wing, her small boots squeaking softly on the polished floor. Her chest felt tight, as if every step pressed another invisible weight onto her ribs. A few students passing by glanced at her, some curious, some indifferent, but she kept her eyes on the floor. Shame had a way of blurring the world. She held her trembling hands close to her body and tried not to think of the scraps of her assignment still scattered across the classroom floor like broken feathers. She didn't know if she was more hurt or more confused. All she knew was that the world felt colder inside the school than it did outside in the snowstorm. When she reached the office door marked Dean of Students, Richard Palmer, she hesitated for a moment before knocking. A low, gruff voice replied, "Come in." Lily stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of old coffee and citrus cleaner. Behind an oak desk sat Richard Palmer, a man in his late 40s with a square jaw, salt and pepper stubble along his chin, and deep-set eyes that always looked slightly tired. His dark brown hair was beginning to thin at the top, and he wore wire-rimmed glasses that slid down his nose whenever he leaned forward. Palmer had the build of someone who used to be athletic, broad shoulders, thick wrists, but the softness around his midsection suggested long hours of paperwork and administrative meetings. His demeanor was calm but stern, shaped by years of mediating student conflicts and dealing with disciplinary issues. What most people didn't know was that Palmer had once dreamed of being a firefighter. A back injury during his early 20s ended that dream abruptly, leaving him with a lingering sense that life rarely honored effort. Because of that, he sometimes judged others too quickly, especially children who reminded him of the ambitions he had lost. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Lily obeyed quietly. The chair felt too big for her, and her small feet dangled above the floor. Palmer opened a file folder and scanned the documents without looking at her. "Your teacher, Mrs. Rollins, reports that you disrupted class by submitting a false assignment and refusing to correct your story. Is that accurate?" Lily swallowed hard. "I didn't lie, sir." Palmer raised an eyebrow. Your file lists your father's occupation as federal employee. That is quite different from what you described. He is a federal employee, Lily whispered, but he's also... Lily, Palmer cut in, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. I understand that children sometimes exaggerate. Wanting your parent to seem important is normal, but creating elaborate stories about military ranks and trained dogs, that concerns me. Lily's eyes widened. But I'm not exaggerating. My dad is... Really? Enough. His tone sharpened, not unkind, but dismissive, as if he were swatting away a fly rather than crushing a child's truth. This school values honesty above all else. If you persist in fabricating things, you make it difficult for your teachers to trust you. The words stung deeply. Lily felt them sink into her like icy needles. I'm telling the truth, she whispered, but the words were so faint they vanished in the stale office air. Palmer sighed and leaned back, folding his arms. His blue dress shirt strained slightly against his shoulders. Whether you believe it or not, these kinds of stories can be harmful. Children in your situation, his eyes flicked briefly to her worn boots and fraying sweater, sometimes feel the need to make up heroic tales. It's a way of coping, I suppose. Lily's stomach twisted. Children in your situation. She wasn't sure which part hurt more, the assumption about her family or the certainty with which he said it. Before she could respond, a soft buzz vibrated in her pocket. Palmer frowned. Phones should be off during school hours. Lily didn't argue. Her hands shook as she pulled the phone out and glanced at the screen. A message from Mom. Dad and Max just left the base. Snow is heavy. They'll get to school before 10. Don't worry, sweetheart. For a moment, warmth bloomed in Lily's chest. A small smile flickered across her lips, fragile, hopeful. Palmer extended his hand. Let me see that. Lily reluctantly showed him the message. He read it quickly, then handed the phone back with a shrug. That doesn't prove anything. Anyone can send a message like that. But it's from my mom, Lily said, voice trembling. And my dad really is... Lily, Palmer interrupted again, sharper this time. If you continue insisting on this fantasy, you'll face further consequences. Her heart hammered painfully. Tears threatened to escape, but she blinked them back. She wouldn't cry here. She wouldn't give him or anyone else another excuse to call her dramatic or dishonest. Palmer tapped a pen against the desk. You will return to class and rewrite your assignment truthfully. Your father's real occupation. No more military stories. Lily stared down at her hands. She wanted to scream, to insist, to fight. But every adult she had encountered that morning had the same expression, impatient disbelief. She felt like a tiny voice trapped inside a collapsing snow globe, shaking but unheard. Do you understand? Palmer asked. Lily nodded silently. Her throat ached too much to speak. Good. I'll let your teacher know you're corrected. He closed the file with a dull thud, signaling the end of her plea. Lily stood on unsteady legs. As she reached the door, she heard Palmer mutter under his breath, Poor kid. She just wants attention. The words sliced into her like a blade. She stepped into the hallway, the air, colder than she remembered. Down the corridor, she could faintly hear the sound of parents chatting in room 12, voices bright with pride and laughter. Somewhere among them, Mrs. Rollins was undoubtedly telling her version of the morning, painting Lily as the dishonest child. Lily tightened her grip on her phone. Her father was coming. Max was coming. They would tell the truth. No one else would believe. She just had to make it until then. Outside, the snowstorm thickened, wind howling down Maple Ridge's narrow streets. And miles away, a man in a heavy winter military jacket walked through the blinding snow with a German shepherd at his side, both determined to reach the little girl who needed them more than ever. Snow hammered against the tall windows of Maple Ridge Elementary, blurring the world outside into shifting streaks of white. Inside room 12, the air felt unnaturally heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. When Lily Brooks stepped back into the classroom, the sound of whispers scattered the moment she entered. Her classmates stared, some with pity, some with confusion, and some with the kind of distance that children learn too young, when an adult's accusation becomes louder than a friend's truth. Lily's cheeks were pale, her long, dark brown hair clinging in damp strands near her temples, where the heat of her tears had met the cold of the hallway. Her eyes, soft and hazel, were still rimmed with red. She had walked back from the principal's office with the strange feeling of being both present and invisible, like a ghost wandering through brightly lit rooms. At the front of the class stood Janet Rollins, tall and rigid as ever, her angular frame silhouetted against the white glare of the snow outside. Her smooth but stern face, framed by tightly pinned pale blonde hair, carried the expression of someone ready to administer a lesson. One she believed was for the greater good, though it was nothing more than the sharpening of her own prejudices. She folded her thin arms across her chest, satisfied to see Lily return with slumped shoulders. "Come here," she said, tapping a manicured finger against the floor in front of her. Her voice sliced through the room like the crack of a frozen branch. Lily walked slowly down the narrow aisle. Each step felt like wading through deep snow, heavy and trembling. She could feel every eye on her, from the girl with the pink sweater who used to share snacks with her, to the boy who always smiled when they passed in the hallway. Today, none of them looked like friends. Today, she was the child labeled a liar. When she reached the front, Mrs. Rollins raised her voice just enough so the parents volunteering in the classroom could hear. "Lily has something she would like to say to everyone." Lily's throat tightened. She didn't want to speak. She wanted her father. She wanted Max. She wanted the truth to be something that didn't need defending. "Go on," Mrs. Rollins urged. "Apologize for misleading the class." Lily's small hands curled into fists at her sides. Her breath came out shaky. I'm not lying," she whispered. Mrs. Rollins stiffened. "Lily, we have already discussed this in the principal's office." Lily swallowed painfully and forced her voice louder. "My father is a lieutenant colonel. Max is a military working dog. They really are coming." A few students exchanged unsure glances. A mother near the back raised her eyebrows, and Mrs. Rollins let out a soft, mocking laugh. "Lily," she said, leaning forward slightly, her icy blue eyes sharp, "listen to me very carefully. Children from families like yours do not have military pseuds, heroes for fathers. They just don't." Her words were slow, deliberate, and poisonous. Lily's heart lurched. She felt something inside her tighten, not break, because she had been taught her whole life to hold herself together, but tighten so painfully that it hurt to breathe. She imagined her father's face, the strong jawline covered in soft stubble, the deep-set brown eyes that always softened when he looked at her, the tiny scar above his eyebrow, earned during a training mission years ago. She imagined Max, the German shepherd with powerful shoulders and amber eyes, always alert yet gentle with her. She pictured them both fighting storms far harsher than the one outside as they made their way toward the school. Before she could say more, a firm voice cut through the tension. "Mrs. Rollins?" The classroom turned. Linda Carter, the school's principal, stood in the doorway. She was a woman in her early 50s with short black hair streaked lightly with gray and warm brown skin that contrasted sharply against the stormy white backdrop behind her. She wore a deep green wool coat dusted with snow, and her expression, usually gentle, was unusually tense. Principal Carter was known for her level-headedness and her ability to calm a room with her presence. She had a softness around her eyes, etched there by years of working with children, but beneath that softness was a fierce protectiveness. Today, the protectiveness was showing. "I need to speak with you immediately," she said. Mrs. Rollins frowned. "I'm in the middle of addressing an issue with this student." "This cannot wait," the principal said, her voice low but urgent. Something in her tone made every parent, every child, straighten up. Even Mrs. Rollins felt the shift in the air. She stepped toward the doorway, pausing just long enough to shoot Lily a look of annoyed expectation, as if the girl had somehow caused this inconvenience too. Lily remained standing alone at the front of the class, feeling the cold draft sweep through the crack of the open door, chilling her exposed hands. Through the window, the snowfall grew thicker. The outlines of trees disappeared into white. And then, shapes emerged. Dark shapes, large vehicles, parked in a slow, deliberate formation in front of the school. Gasps rippled through the room. Parents rose from their seats. Children pressed their faces to the glass. Out of the swirling curtain of snow, 3 black SUVs materialized, their engines humming low, headlights cutting through the storm like watchful eyes. The doors opened. Several figures stepped out, tall silhouettes in dark coats, moving with coordinated precision. And then the last door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a crisp white military overcoat that glowed strikingly against the storm. His cap shielded his face, but even from a distance, his posture radiated authority and strength, the unmistakable bearing of someone who had spent a lifetime serving under pressure. At his side leapt a German shepherd, powerful and alert, snow gathering on its thick black and tan coat. Its ears were upright, its stance protective. Max. Lily's breath caught in her chest. He was here. They were here. The truth, buried beneath layers of disbelief and prejudice, was finally walking toward the school, one determined step at a time. A blast of cold air burst into room 12 as the classroom door swung open, sending loose papers fluttering and making every child instinctively shrink into their coats. Snowflakes spiraled across the threshold like tiny white sparks before melting on the warm floor. For a second, the entire room fell still, frozen in a mixture of awe and disbelief, as two figures filled the doorway, backlit by the raging winter storm. The first was a man whose presence seemed to reshape the room. Lieutenant Colonel William Brooks, freshly arrived from Fort Harrison, stood tall and unwavering. He was in his late 30s, with a powerful, square-shouldered build shaped by years of demanding fieldwork. His white winter military overcoat fit him with crisp precision, decorated with insignias that gleamed faintly in the classroom lights. His face bore the edges of hardship. Strong jawline dusted with dark stubble, a faint scar above his right eyebrow earned during a nighttime rescue mission years earlier, and eyes the deep, steady brown of someone who had seen danger and survived it. Those eyes were sharp until they landed on Lily. Then, for the first time that morning, something inside them softened. At his side padded Max, the 4-year-old German shepherd who had crossed blizzards, deserts, and battlefields with him. Max was large for his breed, with thick black and tan fur dusted by snow, powerful legs, and a noble stance that radiated discipline. His ears pricked forward, alert, scanning the room with the intelligent awareness of a trained service dog. But when he spotted Lily, his tail gave one slow wag, controlled yet full of recognition. Gasps rippled through the class. A few children leaned forward in wonder, others stiffened in fear at the sight of such a commanding animal. Parents rose slowly from their chairs. Even those who knew nothing about military ranks could sense the authority that Colonel Brooks carried with every step. He entered calmly, but the room seemed to rearrange itself around him, as though gravity itself acknowledged the weight of who he was. Lily stood frozen at the front of the class, her heart pounding so hard she thought the whole room must hear it. For hours, she had been sinking, drowning, in accusation and disbelief. Now she felt something unfamiliar blooming inside her, relief and vindication. "Dad," her voice cracked on the single word. All the strength she had used to hold herself together shattered like thin ice. Colonel Brooks crossed the classroom in long, purposeful strides. Parents instinctively stepped aside. Students parted like water around a stone. When he reached Lily, he dropped to one knee, military coat brushing the floor as he opened his arms. Lily collided with him, burying her face into the cold fabric of his uniform. His gloved hands rose to cradle her head, pulling her close with a blend of fierceness and tenderness that only a father who has missed too many moments can understand. "I'm here," he whispered, his voice low and steady. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm sorry I was late." Lily's small shoulders trembled as she held on to him as if afraid he might disappear again. Her tears dampened the front of his uniform, but he didn't care. He had marched through storms for her. A few tears were nothing. When he finally stood, he kept one protective hand on her shoulder as he faced the room. His gaze swept over the students, the parents, and then landed on Janet Rollins. She looked pale, almost gray, standing stiffly behind her desk. Colonel Brooks took a step forward, calm but unwavering. "You must be Mrs. Rollins." Her throat bobbed. Yes, sir." "I understand," he said, his voice still measured, "that my daughter was accused of lying, that her assignment was torn apart in front of her peers, and that she was publicly shamed for speaking the truth." The room felt colder than the snowstorm outside. Mrs. Rollins tried to respond, but her voice trembled. "Colonel Brooks, I didn't know. I couldn't confirm." "You didn't verify," he corrected softly. That softness was far heavier than anger. You assumed. A shudder ran through the class. He wasn't raising his voice. He didn't need to. His authority was in the quiet way he held himself, the steadiness of a man who had led soldiers through war zones far more dangerous than this classroom. My daughter does not lie. Military children grow up with sacrifices most people cannot imagine. They move constantly. They miss birthdays. They spend holidays wondering if their parent is safe. And they learn to be brave in silence. He rested a hand gently on Lily's back. She deserved to be believed. Mrs. Rollins pressed a hand to her mouth, tears gathering. I was wrong, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Lily. I judged you unfairly. Lily looked up, her eyes still swollen but calmer now. She hesitated. Hurt didn't fade instantly, but then she spoke softly. Just believe students more next time. The room breathed again. Several parents wiped their eyes. Children nodded silently, some looking at Lily with admiration for the first time all day. To break the tension, Max stepped forward and gently nudged Lily's hand with his nose, letting out a soft huff. A ripple of delighted whispers moved through the class. Even Mr. Bennett, a tall father with thick glasses and a stern appearance, cracked a smile. Colonel Brooks turned to the children. Would anyone like to meet Max? The response was instant, explosive. Children crowding forward until the colonel raised a hand, reminding them with a smile to approach gently. Max sat proudly, tail sweeping the floor as eager hands reached out to pet him. Parents watched with softened expressions. Even Mrs. Rollins, though still shaken, stepped closer with a humbled posture, witnessing how easily Max transformed tension into warmth. Colonel Brooks spent the next 10 minutes sharing stories, carefully selected, child-appropriate, about life in the military, about nights spent training in snowstorms, about how Max had saved lives by detecting danger humans couldn't see. As he spoke, the room shifted from a place of fear to a place of respect. When he finished, the principal, who had arrived silently a moment earlier, suggested a short break before returning to presentations. Lily pressed closer to her father as Max settled at her feet like a living shield. For the first time that day, the world felt right again. She was no longer the girl no one believed. She was the daughter of a man who came through storms for her, and the companion of a dog who stood like a guardian at her side, and everyone in that room knew it. The last traces of winter clung stubbornly to the edges of Maple Ridge, thin white lines gathered in the shadows where the sun could not quite reach. 3 months had passed since the stormy morning that changed everything inside Room 12. 3 months since truth shattered prejudice, since a little girl stood alone and refused to surrender her father's honor. Though spring had begun brushing the pines with new green, the town still carried the memory of that day like a lingering echo. And inside Maple Ridge Elementary, the change was unmistakable. The hallways, once filled with the usual clatter of books and chatter, now carried an additional layer, a quiet awareness, a gentler way of looking at one another. It wasn't a perfect school, far from it, but something essential had shifted. And the shift had a name: accountability. It began with the teachers. The district brought in professionals from Helena and Missoula, people trained in confronting the invisible biases that shape classrooms. One of them, Dr. Sarah Whitlock, was a tall, graceful woman in her early 40s with warm brown skin, expressive dark eyes, and short coiled hair cut neatly to her jawline. She dressed simply in long cardigans and soft earth-tone scarves and radiated patience. Her career as a child psychologist had been shaped by a personal tragedy years prior when her younger brother was unfairly expelled from school due to racial assumptions. That injustice carved her into the advocate she was now, firm, empathetic, unwilling to let any child be dismissed. On her first day at Maple Ridge, she stood before the staff and spoke in a calm, steady voice. Bias doesn't make you a bad teacher. Ignoring it does. Many teachers shifted uncomfortably, but one person sat straighter, folding her hands tightly in front of her, Janet Rollins. Rollins looked older now, still tall and angular, but with silver streaks more visible in her pulled-back hair. The sharpness in her gaze had softened, humility had tempered her rigid posture. She attended every training, always sitting in the front row. She asked questions. She volunteered for discussions. Most importantly, she listened, truly listened, in a way she never had before. During one session, Dr. Whitlock asked them to describe a moment when they realized they had been wrong about a student. Rollins lifted her hand. Her voice wavered at first, then steadied. 3 months ago, she said, I judged a child by her coat and her boots and my own blind assumptions. Her throat tightened, but she kept going. I thought I knew what truth looked like. I didn't, and I hurt someone who only wanted to be honest. The room was silent, not with avoidance, but with respect. No one expected her vulnerability, but there it was, raw and sincere. Meanwhile, Principal Linda Carter, with her practical blend of warmth and authority, implemented new school-wide policies. Her dark eyes, usually gentle, burned with determination as she spoke at the assembly. From today forward, we verify before we challenge, we listen before we assume. We protect our students' dignity above everything else. Posters soon appeared throughout the hallways, bright blues and greens with bold white lettering. Truth deserves to be heard. Every student deserves to be believed. But the students weren't passive observers in this change. They were its heartbeat. At the suggestion of the school counselor, Maple Ridge Elementary formed a new student group called the Trust Circle. The group met twice a month in the library, where children gathered on beanbags and soft chairs to share stories. Big ones, small ones, and the kind that didn't seem important until someone finally listened. The group was led by Michael Reyes, a quiet boy with light tan skin, curly black hair, and gentle eyes behind oversized glasses. Michael rarely spoke in class, but he listened like few others could. As a child who had been overlooked his whole life, he understood why the group mattered, and sitting beside him at nearly every meeting was Lily Brooks. Lily had changed too. She was still soft-spoken, still gentle, but her voice no longer shook when she raised her hand. Something in her had strengthened, like ice melting into clear-flowing water. Her classmates noticed. Teachers noticed. Maple Ridge noticed. And sometimes, on days when she felt brave, Lily brought Max. 3 months after his unforgettable arrival, Max had become a local celebrity. Children ran to the fence during recess just to catch a glimpse of him. Parents asked for pictures. Even adults who weren't fond of dogs nodded respectfully when Max walked by. Max took it all in stride, stoic, dignified, loyal. On school presentation days, he sat beside Lily, tail curled neatly around his paws, amber eyes scanning the room with calm vigilance. Today, Lily stood at the front of the gym, preparing to give a presentation about winter safety and teamwork, something she and Max had learned from her father's training stories. She wore a soft blue sweater and dark jeans, her hair braided neatly down her shoulder. She felt steady, strong, not because she wanted to impress anyone, but because she finally believed she deserved to be heard. Max sat beside her, ears perked, panting softly, a reassuring presence. The students quieted as Lily began. Her voice was clear, surprisingly confident for someone so young. Winter can be dangerous. My dad taught me that teamwork keeps people safe. And Max showed me that even when everything seems cold or scary, you don't have to face it alone. She rested a hand on Max's back. His fur was warm under her palm. The crowd leaned forward, not just watching, but listening, truly listening. After her talk, children swarmed around Max, giggling as he licked their hands or gently nudged their shoulders. Parents exchanged soft smiles. Teachers nodded with approval. From across the room, Principal Carter watched with pride. And somewhere near the back, standing quietly near the doorway in her long brown coat, was Mrs. Rollins. Her eyes glistened, not with guilt anymore, but with gratitude. It wasn't often a teacher got a second chance to be better than she once was. As the assembly ended and families stepped out into the crisp spring air, Lily paused at the doorway, looking at the last patches of melting snow across the playground. Snow would always return to Maple Ridge, silent, cold, unrelenting. But the coldness inside the school, that had begun to thaw. And it all started with a girl who spoke the truth, and a father who walked through a storm to make sure the world believed her. Sometimes in life, the greatest miracles don't arrive with thunder, lightning, or shining wings. They come quietly, in the form of a weary soldier walking through a snowstorm for his child, in the steady loyalty of a German shepherd who never leaves your side, or in the courage of a little girl who chooses truth even when no one believes her. And maybe, just maybe, those moments aren't coincidences at all. Maybe they are gentle reminders from God that He sees us, even when the world looks away. He strengthens the small, uplifts the humble, and brings justice at the exact moment it is needed most. Just like Lily, we all face days where our voices feel too small, our truth too fragile, our path too cold and lonely. But God walks beside us in every storm, through fear, through doubt, through silence, until the moment His light breaks through the snow and we finally understand. We were never alone. So as you go back into your everyday life, your work, your worries, your daily struggles, carry this message with you. Stand firm in your truth. Be kind even when others are not. And trust that God will send the right people, the right strength, and even the right miracles at the right time. And now, before you go, if this story touched your heart, please share it so others may find hope. Comment your thoughts or your own experience. Your words may bless someone else. Subscribe and turn on notifications to receive more stories of courage, faith, and the miracles God still places in our lives today. May the Lord bless you, guide you, and protect you and your family. And may He walk beside you through every winter, every storm, and every truth you dare to speak. Amen.